She came to heaven for the very first time after her death, and there, she saw the husband who had passed away long ago. Just as the two of them were immersed in the joy of reunion, a familiar voice suddenly called out from behind her. At that moment, she could hardly believe her eyes, because the man walking toward her was the first love she had never stopped thinking about. Here, Joan had to make a choice. Would she step into eternity with the husband who had stayed by her side for 67 years? Or would she choose the first love who died suddenly not long after they were married?
I choose neither of you.
You're kidding, right?
Joan and Larry were like most married couples. Their life together was filled with arguments and compromises. But through all of it, they shared years of quiet happiness that felt ordinary, yet warm and real. Now, however, Joan was terminally ill. She and Larry had already reached a silent understanding. After today's party ended, they would finally tell everyone the truth, because today was also a special day for the family. They were about to welcome their great-grandchild into the world, and everyone had gathered for a creative gender reveal party. The family placed a note inside a balloon. The color of the paper would reveal the baby's gender. But just then, Joan's youngest granddaughter discovered something in the basement. It was an old photograph, yellowed with age. When everyone gathered around to look at it, they realized it was Joan's wedding photo with her first husband. He had been a soldier, and during those war-filled years, he died on the battlefield. Even after all these years, that memory remained a quiet wound deep in Joan's heart. Larry was curious about the man in the photo. He leaned in, trying to take a closer look, but before he could see clearly, a butterfly cookie suddenly got stuck in his throat. Just like that, Larry died without warning. The roaring sound of a train echoed in his ears. Larry slowly came back to consciousness. When he opened his eyes, he was standing on a train, and he looked like a middle-aged man again. Before he could understand what was happening, an announcement suddenly blasted through the speakers. The volume was painfully loud. His ears rang with sharp pain. He quickly removed his hearing aid. As the train pulled into the station, Larry was shocked to see that almost everyone around him got off. Still confused, he followed the crowd into a massive station. He tried asking people nearby for help, but their responses only made things more confusing.
Hi, can you help me?
Your AC will be with you shortly.
Are you an AC?
Yes, but I'm not your AC. Come.
Looking around at the unfamiliar place, Larry had no idea what to do, so he sat down on a nearby bench, waiting for the so-called afterlife coordinator to come find him. After what felt like a long time, his coordinator finally appeared.
Who are you?
I'm Anna, I'm your AC,
What does that stand for?
your afterlife coordinator.
Annie explained that she would be responsible for guiding Larry through the afterlife. Larry did not want to believe it, but the truth was simple. He was already dead. Looking down, he noticed the small pink slip he had dropped on the bench. At that moment, Larry finally learned something joyful. His great-grandchild was a girl. He followed Annie through the station, repeatedly telling her about the strange experience he had just gone through. Still, he refused to accept the fact that he was dead. Seeing this, Annie took out a small mirror she carried with her. The moment Larry looked into it, he finally accepted the truth. This place was a massive transit hub. Everyone who arrived here took on the appearance of the happiest time in their lives. That was why so many children seemed to be here. For many people, childhood had been their happiest years. Annie told Larry that every soul who arrived here had 7 days. Within those 7 days, they had to choose an eternal world they wished to live in forever. But hearing this left Larry overwhelmed, because he could not stop thinking about Joan, who was still suffering from illness. Annie reminded him again and again to think carefully. Once a choice was made, it could never be changed. Just then, an announcement suddenly echoed through the station. It was a notice about a fugitive. Every eternal world had a red door. Anyone who passed through it would return to this station, but doing so would make them a wanted fugitive to all administrators. And once they were caught, they would be exiled to a void filled with endless suffering. Finally, Annie brought Larry to his room. Every detail inside had been designed according to his personal preferences. Even the clothes in the closet were exactly the styles Larry loved. After leaving a few brochures about different eternal worlds, Annie quietly left the room. Larry tried turning on the television to pass the time, but every single channel was just another advertisement for an eternal world. With nothing else to do, Larry stepped outside the station to get some fresh air. He eventually found a small bar, but what Larry could never have imagined was that the bartender standing before him was Luke, Joan's first husband. After arriving here, Luke had chosen not to enter any eternal world. Instead, he stayed behind and became a bartender. Across the distance of time itself, he was simply waiting for the day he could see Joan again. The two men did not know each other, but they talked for hours. Their conversation revolved around memories of the people they loved most in life. What neither of them realized was that the woman they loved was the same person. That night, Larry drank a lot. Early the next morning, Annie came looking for him. Larry had been thinking about something. Why would anyone choose to stay here instead of entering a perfect eternal world? Annie explained that the reasons were different for everyone. Some people simply could not accept their own death. Some stayed because they were waiting for someone they loved. And the saddest of all were those who stood before countless eternal worlds, yet could never bring themselves to choose. When Larry asked why she herself stayed here, Annie gave no answer. Instead, she asked him if he had made his decision. Larry actually actually knew the answer. He had always loved the idea of the Hawaiian world with endless beaches, but even so, he still wanted to know what Joan would think. As a long-time administrator of the station, Annie had seen situations like this countless times. Many people here hoped to see their parents again, but those loved ones had already entered their own eternal worlds. Even if they managed to reunite, they would have to stay there forever. That was why Annie always hoped the souls who arrived here would make the right choice for themselves, because there was no way to know when Joan would arrive here. The only thing Larry could do was wait, but after waiting for an entire week, Joan still had not appeared. So in the end, Larry made a decision. He would go ahead to an eternal world first. Before leaving, he wrote a letter for Joan. What he did not know was that Joan had already reached the final moments of her life. In a daze, she too boarded the train bound for the transit station. Before departing, Larry asked Annie to deliver the letter to Joan for him, but that kind of action violated the station's rules, so Annie suggested something else. They could simply contact each other by phone. At that very moment, Joan arrived at the station. Meanwhile, Larry's mind was filled with thoughts of the beach world he was about to enter, so when Joan brushed past him in the crowd, he failed to recognize her at first, but only seconds later, Larry suddenly realized the woman he had just passed was Joan. He quickly turned around and shouted her name. Unfortunately, the crowd was too large. Joan simply assumed it was her imagination. When she finally stepped into the main hall, she was stunned by what she saw in the mirror, the young face staring back at her.
Joan! Joan! Sweetie! Ah, sweetie. I missed you so much.
Their reunion filled them with overwhelming joy. Tears streamed down their faces. Larry could not help but say that Joan looked incredibly beautiful now. He told her that this time, they could finally go together to a world filled with peace and happiness, a place where they could spend eternity side by side. But before Joan could fully process everything, a stranger gently pulled her aside. He was her afterlife coordinator, Ryan, and he had brought Joan a huge surprise. Not far away, Luke slowly walked out from the crowd. At that moment, Joan felt her heart skip a beat. She had never forgotten Luke, yet seeing him again like this felt unreal.
Sorry, I forgot to ask your name. What's your name again?
I'm Luke.
Just like 60 years ago, the moment their eyes met, everything else faded away. They were lost in the deep feelings that had waited decades to return. Larry soon began to sense that something was wrong. He finally realized the truth. The person Luke had been waiting for all this time was Joan. Hearing Larry call her name again and again, Joan finally snapped back to reality. Now both of her husbands stood before her. She had no idea how to face this situation, so Ryan decided to guide her away for the moment. On one side was the husband who had spent more than 60 years with her. On the other was the first love she had never truly let go of. Joan simply did not know what to do, but Ryan refused to make the decision for her. He had already reviewed all of Joan's records. In his mind, someone as intelligent and strong-minded as Joan would surely make the right choice on her own. Just then, rapid knocking suddenly came from the door.
Oh my God, Luke, what a surprise!
It turned out that this meeting was arranged by Ryan for Joan's future happiness. He had deliberately created a chance for the two of them to be alone. Yet even though the man beside her was the first love she had long dreamed about, both of them felt strangely nervous. The passionate promises they once shared had turned into polite and careful conversation, but right at that moment, an announcement about a